Hello everyone and welcome to today's topic, structure. So we'll be talking about the structure of chemicals, things that you might experience in everyday life, or the drugs we'll be talking about in this class together. So we'll discuss chemical bonds, we'll discuss how to draw or visualize chemicals, and this can be done in ways that look very complicated and can also be done in ways that look much more simple, thank goodness. Let's start simply though, folks. What is a bond? So a bond occurs when two distinct atoms share electrons. So up until now, we've kind of talked about how individual atoms have electrons in their orbitals. But what we're going to learn today is that two different atoms can share. How nice is that? Now, different elements can make a different number of bonds. We're not going to really focus on that in this class, folks, but it's kind of governed by something called the octet rule. And so the octet rule basically tells us that atoms will form the number of bonds that gets them to the most kind of stable place. And so stability really means that these atoms have a full octet or a full 8 electrons. And we're not really gonna get into why 8 too much. But we'll just understand that 8 electrons kind of makes many atoms happy and stable. And so an atom will form however many bonds it needs to have and or share 8 electrons total. There are different types of bonding. Of course, there can be no bonding, right? So no bonding exists when there is no electron sharing at all. A covalent bond is the definition that we already wrote out together on the first slide of this video, excuse me. So a covalent bond means that electrons are shared between two atoms. So let's say we have atom 1 and atom 2. We could visualize this covalent bond as being these atoms sharing 2 electrons together. If we compared that with, let's say, no bonding, folks, we could understand that atom 1 has its own electron and atom 2 has its own electron, kind of off on its own, as opposed to this nice sharing in a covalent bond. The last type of bond is called an ionic bond. And this isn't really a type of bond because I like to think of a bond as electron sharing. An ionic bond happens when electrons were stolen. So remember that both atom 1 and atom 2 in this drawing had 1 electron each. When they weren't bonded, they had their own electrons and weren't really doing anything with each other. In a covalent bond, those 2 electrons were being shared nicely between the 2. In an ionic bond, what would happen is that atom 2 would have stolen an electron, and atom 1 would have lost its electron. And so oftentimes when this happens, you'll end up with atoms that have a charge because one has gotten an extra electron and one has totally lost an electron. And remember, these electrons are negatively charged. So those are the 3 types of bonding that we can understand. No bonding at all, nothing happened. Covalent bonding, where we have sharing of electrons, or an ionic interaction where there was some stealing of electrons from one atom to the next. Up next, we'll talk a little bit more about covalent bonding.